And we're live.
Hello everybody and welcome to OAG's latest webinar. February already, actually almost nearly March. And today we're going to be talking about North America. It sort of feels like we should have had a snow-filled picture here because there's a whole lot of snow disruption going on, particularly in the East Coast at the minute. But more broadly than that, we really want to understand with all of the things that are happening, geopolitical events, and I could reel off a list as long as my arm probably. Is it really business as usual in the industry right now? So that's what we want to have a bit of a discussion around today. We've got a couple of speakers who are really well placed to give us their insights on what are happening or what is happening in their markets. Delighted to welcome Courtney Miller back. Courtney has joined us before on the webinar, and we always enjoy hearing his insights and views on what's happening in the market. So welcome back, Courtney.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
And we're also delighted to be joined by Ignacio Ottati, Manager for Air Service Development at Calgary, so bringing a slightly different perspective perhaps today. Welcome, Ignacio. We're really looking forward to hearing from you today as well.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And as ever, last but not least, all of those things apply. Welcome to John Grant, OAG's Chief Analyst, here to share his positive or negative outlook today. I'm not sure, John. We'll have to see how it unfolds.
Yeah, see how we get on. I'm surrounded by positivity in Calgary and a perhaps more cynical perspective sometimes from Courtney on some of the stuff.
I'm always cynical.
Oh well, so you can play the mid ground, John, or something.
Yeah, I'll stick it middle of the road and get run down.
For those of you and for those of you who don't know me, my name's Deirdre Fulton, sometime host of these webinars for OAG. I'm a partner at Midas Aviation and work closely with OAG. Welcome back to all of those people who join us regularly. You know the drill. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat and we'll deal with them as we go along. As usual, we have got a bit of a sort of top-down look at the market. And really what we want to kind of explore today is how resilient is demand. There's a bit of volatility around. There feels like there has been for quite some time. Is that changing? Has the market become more able to cope with that volatility? We want to have a bit of a look at network expansion and growth, and then what does it all mean? What will be happening? We might get our crystal balls out for that. Okay, so let's go on to our first slide. So as I said, a bit of a top-down look. That's our kind of usual global capacity slide. We've taken, so the yellow line is 2026 and the prior years going back to 19 in the black to show where we are tracking. We've been running at sort of 3.5, 3.8% above. We've pushed forward capacity into the first half of the year, and you can see that there's a bit of a dip as we go into the summer season. Now, to some extent, there'll be a bit perhaps of capacity updates still to come. But at this point, we're getting close to the summer season, so I wouldn't expect there to be too much variation there. So there's a kind of interesting question there about, is it schedule uncertainty or is it a slower picture for the rest of the first half of 2026? John, I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'd love some thoughts as well, Deirdre. It's a quandary, isn't it? It's not the usual pattern. If you look and see over previous years, there's normally a bit of a spurt on from the summer's programs, and I think part of it is schedules uncertainty. There's no doubt about that. Not in those mature markets. So I think the North American market is pretty stable. It's not growing much, but it is what it is. But I think it's more in Asia and parts of the Indian subcontinent where we're seeing those changes taking place. And some of that's about aircraft availability and, regulators, particularly in places such as India, suddenly demanding more control and less flying and more checks and things like this. So I think all of those are playing into this. I think that one of the flexible things, and we'll come on to it later, is certainly in some markets, we're seeing some quite interesting network change and airlines responding to regulatory taxation type charges where they're, moving capacity from one country to another. And at the same time, we're suddenly seeing some quite surprising developments. So we've got AirAsia X coming back to London and doing low-cost long haul again via Bahrain. And I think it was in the same week as the Bahraini Airport Authority announced AirAsia X. They also announced a beyond luxury charter type operation based in Bahrain. So that's interesting. So yeah, there's lots happening. The one for me, which I find most amusing, is Riyadh Air. The great Riyadh Air still have no flights on sale for commercial purposes into the summer. That's not going to make all the difference, but it's a factor in it, I think. And you've got
we're still in a watch this space, aren't we, on that one?
In Courtney's market, you've got Spirit with a bit less capacity, and all of these. It's all bits on the fringes that make the difference. I think that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, interesting.
Is demand down? I don't know. Courtney and Ignacio, what do you think in your markets? Is it softened?
So the really interesting dynamic right now is in Ignacio's market, Canada. I'm really interested to hear from him kind of their perspective on demand from the Canadian passenger.
Yeah, so it's actually funny. I was just looking at some data here. For the month of January, we've seen a record in load factors, which it's never the case, and it's to the international market. I was just breaking it down. Our European carriers saw in January a 94% load factor going specifically to Europe. And the European carriers that we have are not many. We have KLM, Condor, Discover, Edelweiss, and to see that, that's interesting. However, we are an outlier, not only in Canada, but as Canadians, we are very different from what happens in the US. So is our demand down? Yeah, I don't think so, really. At least not to the international market. Now, when we look at transporter, that is a completely different story.
But see, this is
we'll come back to that.
That subject.
This is what we as Americans provide as a gift to the rest of the world, right? We share. We're open. We're very happy to share with Latin and Caribbean and international.
That's quite a unique perspective, actually, Courtney.
Have you discussed that?
And he said I was cynical.
Yeah, have you discussed that with any of your hoteliers who for many years have been reliant on Canadian traffic in February and March? Or are they just backfilled with everything else?
Yeah, we'll talk about that because that's creating a very interesting dynamic with domestic travel inside the U.S. Sure. But yes, they very much miss the Canadian traveler because as it turns out, they are very excited to get out of the cold this time of year and spend money in the warm climates, and only about 3/4 are showing up. So there's just a lot of dynamics that are playing out here as a result of that. It's rippling through both the economy and the airlines.
And you touch on something there, Courtney, that is key. That's why Calgarians are so different. We have the highest income in all of Canada. So that 3/4 that you mentioned, it's probably mainly Calgarians compared to the rest of Canada. So we are also the highest or the fastest growing province. So if it's by the numbers, I'm pretty sure it's a lot of Albertans, Calgarians mainly. So yeah.
Wow. Okay, hold that thought for a moment. We'll go back to the slide deck because I want to just pick up on that international point. I think as we've sort of seen in the past few months, as we've come through the winter season, international capacity is what's driving growth right now. Domestic globally pretty flat. This is just looking at the region position, although actually the US is a little bit stronger than the rest of Asia and Europe, and bit stronger growth elsewhere. Of course, the doorbell rings when I'm talking. Okay, just par for the course, really, isn't it? I'm sure the dog will stop barking eventually. And then internationally, the situation's kind of reversed. You've got pretty strong growth across some markets, Southwest Pacific, and that's really international growth for inbound and outbound Australia that's behind that. We're going to do a deep dive into Australia at some point soon, so watch this space for that. And then Asia and Europe really kind of growing, and the Middle East to some extent at trend, steady 5.5% growth. And interestingly, this is the first time I think for a while we've seen international capacity lagging that trend for North America. Now, obviously, we've got Canada and the US in there, but we've sort of seen reasonably strong growth last year because we had all of that outbound US traffic that was exploring Europe and other parts. So that, for me, maybe a little bit of a alarm bell, a little bit of a warning bell, and I guess part of the mix of all of the things that we've been talking about.
Is it actually in taking a slightly more positive angle, Deirdre?
Taking the positive, I like it.
Yeah. Is that 1% growth actually good for the market? Because that allows the capacity that's been put in the last 12 months to settle, and for the carriers to, get to a position where the routes are supported, there's demand on them, and they're beginning to hit 90% load factors. So I think, if you're constantly putting more and more capacity into what is a mature market, and you've got some of the econometric data and disposable income and consumer confidence that you equate to it, is it actually just a pause for thought moment whilst, the market just settles again and rebalances before it will go on again in next year or the year after?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, if we go down a layer, and this is just now looking at US capacity and Canadian capacity, and we've split this out into the seasons, so current winter season versus last year, and then summer versus last summer. It's kind of, I wasn't expecting quite so much symmetry in terms of the trend by growth by region, if you know what I mean. So I think it's interesting when you sort of look across. There are pockets still, although we don't see it in that bigger European picture. There's really strong growth, relatively small, because this is just percentage, happening to some of the core markets in what we would call Eastern Europe, so the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, Croatia to some extent. And that's happening across both the US and Canada, although a slower, a kind of slower picture, obviously, for the mainstream, which I think probably reflects what you were saying, John, about the market stabilizing a bit in terms of Italy, Spain, Greece, the kind of key Western European destinations. But strong growth, I guess, we're seeing if we look at Upper South America, so Colombia, Ecuador, really strong year-on-year seasonal growth here, and from Canada as well. And these are markets that are familiar for you, Ignacio, aren't they, in terms of your kind of remit and location?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Trendy places for Calgarians to go to. So, yeah.
And are these the Calgarians that would have gone to Florida that are now going further afield, or is this just a different part of the market?
I think it's a bit of a mix. Yes, partially, yes. we've seen a lot of Calgarians selling their properties in Florida, specifically what we call the snowbirds, the people that live in those places, warmer places, for 6 months of winter. They've been selling their places in Fort Myers, Sarasota, Tampa, Orlando, and they're now looking for new places. And as they explore the different areas that they would like to spend their time now, there's no one single place. They've been going to multiple places: Costa Rica, yes, Medellin in Colombia, Quito. So yeah, it's a bit of a mix. I don't have specific numbers that I could share, but yeah, that's what I've been looking at lately and hearing from different people traveling through our airport.
Yeah, interesting.
The Asian market from both Canada and North America in terms of capacity is significantly down, isn't it? And that's driven, I guess, as much as anything by the Chinese situation and not so much Chinese capacity. But United are adding more frequency into Southeast Asia, I think, Courtney, so they must see an opportunity there in the coming years and years.
Yeah, well, United's adding capacity everywhere. But that is one of them. Yes. I think so. The Trans-Pacific is interesting in that the comparison, or what we're comparing against, is probably the better question. That market was almost certainly overheated in 2019 leading into the pandemic. Of course, the pandemic just destroyed it. So you're seeing capacity go back in. We are absolutely short wide bodies today. That will impact, especially when you're seeing yields across the transatlantic, especially premium yields, just stronger than what we're generally seeing to, across the Pacific. So yeah, it's still down, but the open question, and it's still down primarily because of China, right? I mean, that capacity never came back, even domestically. China continues to lag. But yeah, and then I think separately you have United Airlines that is bucking the trend. It's what United prides themselves on doing, and they are bucking that trend by adding capacity into that market. They're owning that market. And I think we can consider this the new normal,
because they're launching daily Incheon, which is going straight into a SkyTeam hub. I mean, that's a brave move. They must be confident about that.
United is short of no confidence. I can promise you that. Like that, they have that in abundance.
Right. And are they banking on a shift in aspirations? Not the right word, but are they sort of banking on we've done Europe, or actually Europe's getting expensive? Will we be welcome in Europe because Europeans don't en masse now want to come to the US? Is there that going on? Do you think there's that kind of confidence, or is it more about these are very high volume markets with lots of potential for growth?
Or is it market saturation in Europe?
Yeah, I think it's more that. I mean, they've run out of dots on them to put on the map for Europe. I mean, we're talking about markets like Split, Palma de Mallorca. I mean, these are purely leisure. I think we saw the Central America numbers much higher, Central Europe numbers much higher.
Yeah,
and that's partially they're just kind of moving to the east. But on the other hand, yes, I mean, Asia, the Trans-Pacific market, like it's just like I don't think people fully appreciate, myself included, just how many people there are in that region and how much growth, particularly out of India, we're seeing. I mean, I've had a lot of conversations about Indonesia lately, which is, again, bucking a different trend. There are 300 million people, the size of the United States population, in an archipelago or a chain of islands that's geographically the width of the continental United States, right? And that's just Indonesia. And Indonesia is down. And then add another 1.4 from China, a billion, and another 1.5 billion from India. So like it's there. I think United is less concerned about, and actually we're not seeing Americans shift away from this kind of travel. It's not, we're actually seeing the opposite. and this is what's so interesting with Canada, we're seeing the point of sale matters so much, and it's benefiting the U.S. carriers because they have point of sale advantage, where the Americans are still traveling, and they're still traveling to Europe. Americans are still traveling to Canada.
Mhm.
So we're seeing that benefit there, and then just a ton of growth and market share and future growth potential and strategy, and add all the things. I think if we're talking about United specifically, their trans-Pacific strategy right now is, I feel like I want to own the market over the next 20 years. And this is what owning the market is going to look like. And I don't think that means it's unprofitable by any stretch.
Yeah.
I just think they know that this is a strategic market, and of several, and they're going to be winners in it.
And they've got to be in it, and
Yeah.
I guess it goes back to that sort of, IATA's 25-year projection of all the mega cities around the world, Deirdre, and basically you've got to be in that dot, haven't you?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Courtney, I'm going to come to one of your slides now, which I think was super interesting. I think I'm not going to even try and do it justice. Actually, I'm just going to ask you to take us through
Okay.
it.
Here's what you need to know. Left chart. Number go down. That was COVID. Number
Yep.
come back up. That was recovery. Number
Yep.
flat. That's
Yep.
the last 3 years. And
Where
it's
we
as
are.
simple as that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We have recovered in the United States. We are no longer in the COVID recovery, but that creates, and this is where I'm just most interested, is not necessarily where the numbers are going, but the individual, almost psychological reactions. I'm not talking about the consumer. I'm talking about investors, airline leaders. And that's why these year-over-year changes really matter. And by the way, this isn't just an airline story. We're seeing this across the economy, where we are, from an economic perspective, we are definitely still in the COVID whiplash. Not the recovery. Things have obviously bounced back, but we are still seeing effects. So you start to see these year-over-year changes that freak people out or make people really excited. But we're still in that whiplash. And we're seeing a lot of, particularly on the investor side, when I talk to a lot of my clients, we're seeing a lot of concern over year-over-year numbers.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, we're still kind of wobbling out of COVID just because people are irrational and we do what we do. That's what I find most interesting right now in the market. We've flattened. Things are very stable, as John mentioned. But flat feels terrible when we just came off of 3 years of that crazy.
It does.
Yeah. I
It's
think
like, where's it all gone? Why has it stopped? Courtney, if I look at the international revenues, for January through to the end of July, they're not particularly positive. And is the actual passenger volume still there? So are yields coming down and airlines are having to work harder to fill those seats, or is that a function of demand softening as much as anything else?
Again, is it more soft, less hot? I don't know, less hard, whatever the opposite of soft is. That's more the interesting question. Remember too, we're talking revenues, so or ticket revenues. So we saw some pretty crazy pricing during the capacity shortages in the US, which the US kind of led out of those. So I mean, we saw, what was it like? We were hearing like $10,000 economy tickets across the Pacific, when there were only so many flights.
People could get into China,
So when we start to see some of those overall revenue numbers, we have to take that into consideration, especially with the capacity constraints. And capacity constraints are kind of migrating around the world. But on the other hand, from a pure demand perspective, I've had so many conversations, and I agree with this. Revenue is an indication of demand. That's what people are ultimately willing to spend, right? And so from that macro perspective, we definitely are seeing, like, we found the market. Like, COVID was such a disruption. it was just a race to get back in a scarcity. And now we found the market. And what were we looking at? Like 1% growth? That's pretty darn good for North America. I mean, it's kind of our jam, like, you know, a point of growth and off we go.
Yeah, I think actually to see this kind of uplift in late 2024, that kind of surprised me. I mean, I guess that came from demand for all of that European growth that we saw, and that's kind of commensurate, I guess, maybe with that slowing down again a little bit. I think this is for me is the most interesting bit of the chart, the 2023 through 2025 position, that you know, we're kind of level, aren't we? You know, there's and maybe we're all to some extent because of what happened in this period. You know, whenever there's a slight downturn or a slight question mark over demand, there's less stability than there was in the market before. Maybe that's how it feels.
I mean, look, we're looking at monthly numbers too, so you see a lot of wobble here. But there's another story in that, which is seasonality trends have shifted, right? In terms of this international travel. So we're seeing some months up, other months down. I think we saw kind of the fall months, and that's just people are traveling a little bit differently now. There's so much attention on the premium leisure, right? So that's driving different trends than, say, what the corporate traveler was before and kind of the economy, especially from a revenue perspective. So we're seeing the wobble, but a lot of that is seasonality as well, where we're right at that kind of, you know, 0 to plus 1% growth in there. And like we're seeing, like the Canadian traveler is just the most fascinating to me right now, because the Canadians travel to the US in December, not in January, February. Well, why is that? Because visiting family and relatives is sticky travel. That's what people will still do. But am I going to go visit Florida this year as a part of my vacation? No. And we're seeing the same out of Mexico, where the VFR travel is just, I guess in some ways is really comforting to know that, like, the connections, that the human connections are still kind of what kind of drives international travel. But we're seeing that seasonal variance where we used to see peaks from the Canadian travelers, leisure peaks, are now more kind of VFR peaks.
Mm-hmm. I think that feels like a nice segue for me into this one, Ignacio, in terms of, and this is not the seasonal picture, but it's looking back at 2025 on that transborder traffic, and it's kind of clear, isn't it, that actually there are distinct things happening in the different segments of the market, looking Canada to US and US to Canada.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, when you look at this chart, you look at every single Canadian airport. Canada overall, the average is down 20%, and we are down only 13%. So when you see the other airports, you start wondering why. And we are one of the two Canadian airports with Americans visiting Canada higher than the others. The closest one would be Vancouver at 1%.
Yeah.
So I think this tells a really good picture. Yes, Canadians have shifted where they travel. Like Courtney said, VFR is critical, but Americans coming to our region is still 7%. It's still in the positive numbers. Why is that? Well, I think it's a mix of things. It's our region, so we are the gateway to the Rockies. Everyone wants that Instagram moment, taking that picture in Banff, Lake Louise, and all of our beautiful lakes. So I think we see a lot of that. Yeah, I mean, the other thing is seasonality. Like Courtney was saying before, yes, during the winter months, we do see a lot of people coming to our region to do a bit of skiing and things like that. So we feel very lucky that we are an outlier when it comes to those numbers. But yeah.
Ignacio, you've got, if the Canadian market's down by 20% to the US, how much of that 20% do you think has pivoted to other destinations, be that the Caribbean, Mexico, upper South America? Do you think that 20% is all still traveling, or some have said, I won't bother this year?
I can speak on specifically Albertans. Albertans are traveling, and that 20% is definitely shifting. We were just speaking about Asia, and we've seen good performance on our Narita flight. It actually went year-round daily because it's actually performing decently well. We've also seen a shift to the Middle East. We've seen a shift to, obviously, a lot of Europe. So yeah, Calgarians and Albertans, definitely they're shifting that travel. The rest of Canada, a little bit different. I cannot really speak on their behalf, and I don't really have those numbers in front of me. But yeah, I think
it's
that's
the same.
Story.
Canadians are traveling. They're just traveling. They're traveling elsewhere. And one of the most interesting dynamics that's very new. So where they're, especially from the east, so Montreal and Toronto, it's to the Caribbean instead of Florida. Turns out it's just past and just as sunny and a little bit warmer. And then, so we've seen that shift from Florida straight to Latin, Northern Latin and the Caribbean. And then Cuba has been shut down.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So Cuba is a major Canadian market, way bigger than what the US.
And Air Canada can't fly there because you can't get any fuel at the moment.
WestJet, Air Canada, I think Transat. So you can't get. So they've turned that off. So what's been interesting that we've been looking at, kind of as part of the weekly reports we put out, is okay. So Cuba's turned off, and it's a major market for Canada during its peak season. What did the Canadian carriers do? They need to redeploy that capacity. I don't think a single flight was added to the U.S. It just went to other Latin American destinations because that's what they're solving. That's what the passenger is solving for.
Yeah.
And that's why you've seen so Air Canada adding a lot. I think that the last number I saw was 13 different flights between Caribbean and Latin America. Same thing with Porter. Porter started their flights to Liberia and Costa Rica, doing incredible. They also added Cancun from Toronto. Transat is doing the same. When you look at that trend, yeah, they're definitely adding a lot to Caribbean and let's say Northern Latin America. So
suddenly this becomes a question of, is this a geopolitical snub for 1 year or 2 or 3, or is this actually the beginning of a structural change in the market?
And actually, I think this one, Courtney, is the kind of canary in the coal mine for me in terms of, if this is happening in the market, so this is for the US, change in travel prices across the kind of wider ecosystem in terms of things that tourists consume. I've probably not done that total justice, so I will let you give a more concise description. But actually, there's a kind of perception, I guess, and maybe this is a European perception because it's a bigger piece for us in terms of travel. The Caribbean has in recent years, probably post-COVID, become really expensive for the sort of week 10-day travel market. But let's not be under any illusions that Florida and leisure destinations in the US have also equally become super, super expensive. That's got to be a factor, hasn't it, in terms of driving that change as well, which plays, I guess, into that structural restructuring point.
So the question that John asked about, when does this reflex become a trend? I think this year determines that. So for the Canadian traveler, and I think the general kind of sense here in the US is that, oh, well, as soon as X stops happening, they'll come back. That is not a safe assumption. Like, we are, this year will mark the first time that Canadians have chosen somewhere else to go 2 years in a row. That's now the new place that you go from. But it's creating a very interesting point of sale imbalance that really impacts the markets, particularly in Florida. So we're seeing an upside down impact. Canadians are not arriving. They're down 25-ish%. And the places in Florida in particular where Vegas, we're also seeing this, where the Canadians used to come and rent cars and stay in hotels, demand's down 25% of the Canadian travel. So hotels have had to respond. They're very unhappy. The local markets are very unhappy because the Canadian market's big, especially in warm climates. And so what we see is that they then have to respond. So how do hotels respond? They actually lower their rates. It actually keeps hotel pricing down. It keeps rental car pricing down. Well, who benefits from that? The U.S. domestic airlines, because now they have more pricing power to move the domestic passenger into the Floridian markets. And this is where it's three-dimensional chess. I get this question all the time. So what's happening? Give me one answer. Like, then just no, because there's like 5 different things that are happening here, and that's one of them. So the U.S. carriers are explicitly benefiting from the point of sale advantage to the foreign traveler not coming to the U.S. or the reduction in foreign travel. On the flip side, we're seeing that point of sale advantage for Americans traveling outbound shift down simply for the same reason, right? I mean, the Americans are traveling, and you see the transatlantic carriers, some of the Canadian airlines, able to attract more of the American travel. On the flip side of that, though, now we get into kind of the crux of that chart, which is the power for airlines to control the overall decision-making of the traveler, of the vacationer in particular, has never been lower. So CPI is up what it's been up. This is since, I think we're taking like a 10-year look here. The domestic airfare has been flat. Now, to be fair, ancillary fees, credit card, all the loyalty stuff that airlines are actually making money on, that is not included. We're just looking at the airfare. So as a traveler looking to make a decision on when, if, or where to travel, it's now, hotel rooms have kept up, but look at the Disney tickets, look at the ski lift tickets, right? Like, the other elements of travel in the travel decision are far more powerful than they ever were. Point being, airlines were so excited, and rightly so, around stimulation. It's what we used to, the Southwest effect, they call it, then the Spirit effect. You could lower airfare because that's why you travel. Like, oh, great, I get a great airfare. Now airfare isn't even near the highest price. So that power has been taken away, particularly on the domestic side, from the airlines in their ability to stimulate traffic. And so that's why we're seeing some of the challenges, some of the shift in markets for like Spirit Frontier, moving into more of these larger markets, spill markets. But this is a major shift around the world, but particularly in the US, where the airlines no longer have stimulation power for the ultimate traveler decision.
So, I mean, that's interesting. It sort of strikes me, domestic flying globally traditionally isn't very profitable. It's what you do to create connectivity in your markets and all of these sort of things. The one exception to that for decades has been the US, because of the consolidation and the big 3/4 has allowed them to be profitable. So if they're not going to stimulate, if they acknowledge they cannot stimulate new markets and they're not going to stimulate any more growth, do they just play the revenue maximization game on the market that is there. And airfares will start to increase again in the next year, 18 months.
Well, who is they, I guess?
Well, those ones on that sheet that we've now put up.
Yeah. So I mean, really what we're looking at here is the airlines aren't actually profitable. Now, this is 2024,
Well, exactly,
right?
Yeah.
So we're still waiting on, because I need the full 10K to really pull out the revenue numbers for loyalty. But in 2024, and we may have crossed the line in 2025, but without loyalty revenues, none of these airlines that we talk about as being, the most profitable would have been profitable. So but this idea of making money elsewhere is not new, right? We used to call it ancillary fees from the ULCCs. It's just that the premium players have found how else to make money, right? You become an airline to find an excuse to make money somewhere else. Like, welcome to 2026, right? This is kind of the idea. This is where they're finding it. Now, what we're finding that's so interesting is that fares in particular. So you can't get too far into this market without mentioning the K-shaped economy. Yes, absolutely, 100%. Delta kind of said the quiet part out loud last spring, I think it was, or summer, where Ed Bastian said, look, we're seeing this is leisure, premium, long haul demand. That is what's driving a ton of their growth. And the majority of that are newly retired people looking to travel, like we all said we would do as soon as we retire. The problem with that is we're talking about the top leg of that K. The bottom leg of the K, by the way, is still there. I mean, I keep getting the question, is the ULCC market dead? No, of course not. Like, it's still there. It's actually bigger than it was in 2019. The people are still there. It's not growing like it was. The problem is we have that top leg of the K growing like crazy, and you can correlate that to the S&P 500, which should terrify everybody on this webinar, right? Because the tail is wagging the dog. Right. So the tail is wagging the dog in terms just from the economy, but now in terms of travel as well. And we saw some serious blips last year when I guess to the right of that chart, when we saw our quote liberation day and the market briefly entered bear territory. Bookings did not good things, right? It was an eye-opening moment for the premium industry when those bookings stopped for a bit. Now, they came back, as did the market. We don't know if they would have anyway. But this shift, we have not proven that this shift to premium is actually a new trend.
Yeah.
Or just where the money happens to be. In a market correction, by market correction, I mean the S&P 500. I mean the stock market is the tail wagging the dog. The dog is air travel demand in this context. Leading into 9/11, we thought the same thing, right? Kind of into the 98, 99, 2000. It's all premium. Premium's going to be here forever. Remember that. And then suddenly it wasn't. We don't know that that's going to be the case, but that is I think an underappreciated concern going forward, that this shift to premium isn't as sticky as people think.
Is it sustainable? I'm a bit in the jury's out on that. I don't know that it's here forever.
Well, if you've got airlines putting 50% of their capacity across the transatlantic in the premium, that's a big bet to make, isn't it?
Yeah. Especially when, and I get that we're talking about North America, but there are a whole bunch of other markets where this is not how the market will travel, or has, the emergent markets essentially don't have the expectation and there isn't the same product comparison, perhaps, or product loyalty, maybe is what I'm trying to say, as there is very particularly in the North American market. I think people are more agnostic, and I think there's another layer of, there's a real generational shift as well in terms of where you want to, when you're booking your holiday, whether it's the 2-week holiday or the city break or whatever. I think there's a very definite generational shift around, okay, if my budget is X, what percentage of that budget am I prepared to spend on each aspect of the journey? And whether that's, is it as much as 50% on the air travel piece? Probably not for a generation, different generations.
I mean, a bit profound, but is this actually what we have here in North America and the Canadian and US markets, and that growth in premium demand and disposable income and all those things? That's because this is probably the most mature market in the world, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Define mature. Like, we're not like behaviorally mature, but
no, as old as Courtney and I.
Demographically,
it's well established. There's players in there. Market entry is quite
consolidated.
Difficult. Exactly, all of those sort of factors. And that's going to happen in other parts of the world over the next 40 or 50 years, whatever it happens to be. Are we actually seeing what the rest of the world will look like in 40 or 50 years' time playing out now in North America?
There's one major difference. And there's one major metric that exists in North America. I think it might just be the US. I should know if Canada has this as well, and not the rest of the world. Credit card exchange rates, right? The 3% on everything. So if you're looking at it from, a credit card holder, if you're looking at it from an airline perspective, these interchange rates do not, they're capped, like they're capped in Europe. So 3%, take your annual spend, whatever you spend on a credit card, take 2% of that. We'll say the credit cards keep it, and then just give that straight to the airlines, right? That is revenue that changes the dynamic fundamentally from anywhere else, because it just doesn't. That money's just not there.
No, that's right. You're true. Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, it doesn't happen in Europe. It doesn't happen anywhere. Just in North America. Interesting. Okay.
Right. Let's come back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, about Calgary. And I like this because I like a map. Ignacio, this is a pretty impressive story, isn't it? In Calgary, there's obviously, there's a positive story there, I guess, about the resilience of Calgary, given what's happening with the transborder market. But the story's kind of bigger than that, isn't it? In terms of connecting Canadians to the rest of the world.
Ignacio, this is your opportunity to pitch for a salary increase. Go for it.
No, I was going to
record it and pass it on.
Well, I was going to jump in a few times there when Courtney was speaking, but I was just fascinated with everything he was saying. What I would say is that the markets between, U.S. market and Canadian market, completely different. So let me dive into Calgary a little bit and explain why we're so different. And then I'll try to break it down, Canada versus U.S. as well. So as you can see here, I'll give you some of the numbers. So 2025, we brought in 19.4 million people. Now, keep in mind, the city of Calgary only has 1.7 million people. When you think about that ratio, it's impressive. We're punching above our weight. If we do a bit of a comparison, and I'm hoping I don't disturb or make anyone mad in Montreal or Vancouver. When we think about our friends from Montreal, for example, they have a population of about 4.4 million people, and they're bringing in, I think for 2025, they closed out the year at 22 million people through their airport. So again, do that ratio, that math in your head.
You guys are punching above your weight for sure.
Yeah, and then same thing with Vancouver. So we have 112 direct destinations from Calgary, and the a lot of people may be wondering why is it that we're bringing in 19.4 million people with a city with only 1.7 million people, and it's the fact that our catchment area, and this is the fascinating part, that we're so different from the U.S. Our catchment area is about 6 million people approximately. So you see in that map right there, we are actually the international airport for those cities right there, Saskatoon and Regina. They drive about 6-7 hours, maybe
Wow.
8 hours, which is the biggest difference between Americans and Canadians, I would say, when it comes to this, just to catch a flight, a direct flight, that is. We have 11 direct routes to or destinations to Europe alone. So people come all the way to Calgary because it's also cheaper than going through Toronto. And it's a great connecting airport. As you can see there, 35% of our traffic is connecting passengers. So yeah, like you said before, we are doing very well. Now, that comparison between Canada and the US, I would say completely different. Courtney was talking before about how things have shifted, and maybe in a negative way. For us, it's been different. When we look at visitor spent in 2024, our numbers were, I think that the total number was 14.4 billion spent in Alberta for travel. That number grew to 15.2 billion in 2025. A lot of it, the majority of it, is from American travelers, but the biggest shift was from domestic travelers. So Albertans deciding to stay in Alberta and spend their money in Banff, Lake Louise, Canmore, Jasper. That's where I see the biggest differences between Canada and the US. And keep in mind, this is one that a lot of people don't really think about. Traveling in Canada is way more expensive than traveling in the US. Significant. The difference is gigantic. I don't want to get into politics, but the reality is, in the US, you have traveling is considered essential. In Canada, it's not. Our government doesn't really see it that way, and it's a user paid model. So when you look at your ticket price, half of it goes to AIF, it goes to all kinds of fees that the airline has to collect that they don't even get to keep, and taxes, and it's crazy. And despite of all that, Albertans and Calgarians are still traveling even more so than before.
I think there's a whole other conversation, isn't there, for another day, about the state of airport infrastructure and aviation infrastructure this is not just limited to Canada and the US. It stretches right across into Europe as well, in terms of the political climate and how that either supports or doesn't investment in infrastructure, and that kind of wider recognition of the positive benefits that come from doing that, particularly when you see international growth that's driven by inbound and the revenue associated with that.
And you think about airports in any market and the cost of infrastructure development, the time, the planning horizons, the investment cases that need to be made, and you do that against the background of good faith and looking at the overall global economy, etc., and then a government comes from nowhere and wipes out your whole investment and growth strategy, and you see swathes of people in Europe crossing the border from Germany to the Netherlands, or from the Netherlands to somewhere else, or from country to country, to save $100, $200, and it's just mad that we've got this situation where aviation is seen as a soft target for tax collection. Another increase on APD in the UK this coming April. family of 4, that's going to be another £150.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
really,
absolutely.
really tough.
I feel like we've gone from positive to negative now.
No, I'll bring us back. You ready? So,
Okay.
little known fact, 23 years ago, I took my new wife to Calgary and Banff. And
Shall we stop this now? Shall we stop this now? Or is it going?
I can't tell you exactly what happened.
Right.
I've got 2 kids now. But for some reason, I can't figure out what it is. She's still married to me. So I think Banff had something to do with it. So there you go. Go to Banff, stay married.
I'm with you. It's a beautiful place. We try to go as often as we can. And I mean, part of the 19.4 million that we bring in is due to the fact that we are really the gateway to the Rockies. So yeah.
And is there, I wonder to what extent you're also benefiting from what we hear, whether this is just a media thing or not, but there is a shift towards much more outdoor-based leisure tourism. We're seeing that right across Northern Europe in terms of lots of parts of Scandinavia. There are certain markets now which are embracing a much more kind of experiential-based travel than perhaps let's go to the city and do all the city-based stuff.
Definitely, and I think that was a result of the pandemic. After the pandemic, I don't have the specific number from our partners from Banff Lake Louise, but I believe the number is somewhere over 25% have shifted to doing a lot more hikes, and therefore now the province have invested a lot of money into that, making sure that those areas they have the infrastructure that they need. And it's not a lot what they need, it's just making sure that they have bathrooms and things like that for people, proper signage, things like that. But yeah, it has increased.
Everything.
Yeah, and I think this is more than just the pandemic, right? This shift, even though that clearly had a lot to do with it, where everybody was cool being outdoors. We're seeing that around, a lot of the U.S. Rocky Mountain destinations are now kind of summer as well. But we're also seeing that, well, I guess on the flip side, Vegas is down, not even just because the Canadians have decided they're not going to come as much as they were. Vegas is just kind of down, and that's very indoors. We also have this generational shift away from the places that the boomers like to go to, to the places, where the millennials and, lest I forget, my small but important generation, Gen X, right? Yeah. We want different things. And we're seeing that macro trend that we're seeing this in other places as well, where the pandemic accelerated things, and we think it was because of the pandemic. Yep. But really, there's this long-term trend that is shifting kind of the travel behaviors.
I read an article a couple of weeks ago about the Ozempic effect as well. So if you've got a significant proportion of your population taking GLP-1 drugs, what they're starting to say is that can also dampen the addiction side of things. So it's not just about food, it's about addictive behavior. And so is it too early to see that kind of trend? People don't want to gamble. People don't want to do those kind of addictive things that have historically driven those kinds of destinations that cater to doing everything in excess, whether it's drinking, gambling, having fun, whatever. So I think
you can't have fun in excess.
But
yeah, having fun is not something you can do in excess. That's I'm
with you on that. Yeah, I'm definitely with you on that.
We are. I guess the reason why we're seeing this shift is probably something we won't know until the historians can take a look back. But you're right. We are kind of seeing a lot of those shifts. I think Vegas is probably the easiest to point at, simply because of kind of what you do in Vegas. Now, that being said, we are still seeing revenues pour into Vegas. It's from a lot fewer people. The casinos are shifting their tactics away from attracting people in and more to just squeezing them as hard as they can once they get there. Gambling revenues, I think, are still kind of. I think they're still growing. I haven't looked at it the last couple months, but that speaks more to this longer term trend until it's not, of a shift to premium, the top of the K. Pick what you want. And again, remember, these boomers that built Vegas, right, from what it was, that the growth of Vegas started when the boomers really kind of started to travel and spend. We're still within that retirement. Just they're the ones with all the money now. We're kind of seeing it follow that trend. I mean, Vegas will adapt and change, and it's very good at that. It's not a cautionary tale for Vegas, but we are seeing those shifts, particularly since that was such a large generation, and the next generation is not. Is a smaller generation. So these are very long, decades long trends that we're seeing.
For those of us engaged in long-term forecasting, though, it's always always of interest. We're out of time pretty much, but I guess it would be good to just have parting thoughts from both of you, Ignacio and Courtney, around where do we think the rest of 2026 is going to take us? I know that's like a open-ended, loaded question, maybe.
I'll start with the positive side, and I'll apologize because I'm always the positive one in every conversation. Based on what we're seeing in Calgary, based on the growth that we've seen, we have announced new routes. Our first route now to the Middle East. Our 2026 could not have started any better, and we have plans to keep growing and keep doing things to attract more people to our region. So, from a Calgarian standpoint, the outlook for 2026 is very positive. For Canada as a whole, I would say it's more balanced. Is that stable state of the market, I guess. Very little growth, but growth nonetheless. So yeah, I would say it's still positive, and that 1-2% that Courtney was talking about before, or whatever that number may be for all of Canada, I still see it as a positive. So yeah, that's my outlook for 2026.
Great. Courtney?
Yeah, 1% growth sounds great when we just got out of minus 97% in COVID, right? Yeah. I mean, it's all that frame of reference. My key word for 2026 that I just keep repeating over and over again, because it's just vague enough that no matter what happens, I can say I was right, is momentum. That's what 26 is all about. And what I mean about that, by that, is things are now, it's taken on its own mass, its own momentum. The recovery kind of is past. Now we're moving forward with momentum. But the reason why I choose that word is because most of the questions I get are about the correction, the downturn, whatever is about to come. And I think what people are missing is that there is so much momentum behind the industry right now that it's going to take a lot in 2026, especially, to disrupt that. So there's a very positive outlook for 26, probably 27, probably 28. Now, as was pointed out to me, momentum also means that, like momentum in aircraft terms during a climb can ultimately lead to a stall. That's where my concern is. What this momentum is actually buying us. We are definitely, the term we use, robbing Peter to pay Paul economically. The U.S. administration very clearly is concerned about the Dow being as high as it possibly can, then, I don't know, say, handling justice coming from the DOJ specifically. So but what people have taken from that, first of all, just the whole ethics of it, that's a different story. Yeah. But from a market perspective, the administration has said, no matter what, like literally no matter what, we will protect this market, not necessarily the economy, but remember, the market is moving the economy. Now, what are the costs of that? We don't see those costs for another 4 or 5 years, which is a very short time frame in the grand scheme of things. But for 26, that means things keep going. For 27, things probably keep going. It'll look a lot like it does now next year.
It's interesting. You know, I always thought a dhow was a boat in the Middle East. Obviously, it's not. Calgarians strikes me as being some alien race that you would come across in Star Trek.
And Dalatians. Don't forget us Dalatians.
Yeah, which is quite fascinating. But, you know, ultimately, and it goes back to that word momentum, 1% momentum on a massive market is, you know, a runaway train that you can't stop. And there might be some changes along the way, and there might be some different players, or the players look slightly different. But with that amount of momentum, you know, it's going to take a lot of railway track for it to slow down.
Yeah. Well, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. Fascinating insights from all of you. Thank you. For those of you who are still hanging on, listening, we're wrapping it up, and we'll get the recording and the slide deck over to you later today. It just really for me to say thanks very much to both Courtney and Ignacio, and John, of course, for joining us. And we'll be back next month. I think exactly a month from now.
Yeah, 28 days in February means we got to come back in 28 days.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, we'll be back on the next webinar talking about another part of the world. If you're not already signed up to the OAG blog, please do that. You'll get lots of interesting insights along the lines of what we've been talking about today. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.